So Monique has the luxury of the podium, but I'm too short for that. So I'm Christina Moya. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Monique Borgerhoff Mulder, our SOAR lecture for today. I took notes, and Monique did warn me that I should be brief, but I feel like that brevity should not come at the expense of being clear about how impressive, influential, and frankly hard to summarize her career has been so far. So I'll largely follow the conventions that I think, go in the SOAR lecture, but I'll still try to be short. So as evidence here as well, Monique is a visiting professor at the University of Bristol, an affiliate at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, an external faculty at the Santa Fe Institute, a member of the National Academy of Sciences, which is not here. But of course, we'd like to thank most importantly, a distinguished research professor at UC Davis in anthropology. So she worked here for 30 years before retiring in 2019. But since retiring, okay, no, not that. There's such a bright light over here. Since retiring, she has published over 40 articles, received 4 large grants from the National Science Foundation, from the National Environmental Research Council and the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and continues her research into understanding the sources of economic inequality across cultures, why we have such diverse family and social systems across societies, and what are the challenges and some of the possibilities that we have for cooperating at large scales to meet kind of conservation and sustainability challenges, which is largely going to be the topic of today's talk. So this is all to say that the label of Emerita faculty at UC Davis should be taken with some skepticism, right? And so earlier today, our colleague Mark Grote, who's here at Davis, was fondly remembering hearing her run across Young Hall from one meeting to the next. It's not a very big building, right? So not sure it required running, but just as evidence of her unflagging energy, which I see no evidence that it is waning. Okay, now back in time, Monique started her formal education actually as a social anthropologist at the University of Edinburgh. Correct me when I'm wrong, and went on to receive her PhD at Northwestern University, where she produced one of the first dissertations that actually took evolutionary insights to make sense of human behavior, specifically in the context of kinship and reproductive decision-making, using the Kipsigis pastoralists of Kenya as a case study. After a postdoc at the University of Michigan, Davis was lucky enough to snag her. And she actually had her interview, she told me today, starting in the same office in Wixon Hall that we put her in earlier today, so that was probably a bit traumatizing, or fondly remembered. And so I'm sure she's eagerly awaiting the call back on the job offer, and hopefully we can lure her back, fingers crossed. Yeah. In her time here, she was involved not only in anthropology, which was her primary department, but also in the ecology graduate group, the animal behavior graduate group, the Center for Population Biology. And this illustrates well the range of her research interests. Her projects usually entail using the most current models in ecology, demography, or evolutionary biology to make sense of the weirdness that is our species and the cultural patterning in our species of humans. But many of those projects also use the theoretical empirical advances and knowledge to address societal challenges, for example, with respect to inequality, health outcomes, and conservation, as we'll hear about today. It's not surprising then that she has mentored numerous graduate students and postdocs in a range of fields who have gone on to teach at various universities across the US and beyond, but also has advised and mentored students who have ended up in kind of environmental science-based organizations such as the Wildlife Conservation Society and the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, which does do conservation work. Monique continues to shape the field intellectually, academically, and practically. She has transformed the field of evolutionary anthropology by doing good research, focusing on getting the right answer, and doing right by the communities with which she works. It's really inspiring to see how deftly she approaches projects that both speak to our deepest curiosities about what it means to be human as a species and our role in the natural world, and that have applied relevance for creating a more just world. All the while, she remains clear-eyed, given her background as a cultural anthropologist, about the importance of understanding each local cultural context in which she works, be they the Kipsigis pastoralists with whom she started working in Kenya, or Pimbwe horticulturalists or Sukuma agropastoralists that she worked with later in Tanzania, and more recently working with people who are managing forests in Zanzibar. So with such a range of experiences across societies, I'm sure it becomes evident that what works in one place might not translate well to another. And Monique has been at the forefront of doing what we now call, I guess, community engaged research before it was fashionable, right? Making sure that the stakeholders who matter most help produce and implement the solutions to the challenges that they face. I'm so pleased now to be able to sit down and learn more about one such project, and I hope you will all join me in welcoming back Monique Borgerhoff Mulder.
Well, after that, anything I say is going to be a disappointment. Thank you, Christine. It's first of all, I'd really like to thank the Stora Committee for inviting me to be a lecturer here. It's really fantastic to be back at Davis, to see all my old friends and colleagues in anthropology and across the biological sciences more generally. I've just had an incredible day. My head is spinning with all the people I've met and all the fun and just the memories. It's great. And particularly thank you to Susan Harrison and Christina, who've been my hostesses and have just made everything really smooth and great. So thanks so much. I'm going to tell a story. This talk is really going to be a story, and it's about an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist, who has been pursuing her scientific ambitions across a sort of an array of through a sort of a storm of bullets and arrows which come from the real world. And so it's really about trying to do applied work in the real world and trying to sort of keep sort of doing good, effective, sort of scientifically interesting work when the real world impinges. And to do this, I'm going to take you to Pemba, which is an island in the Indian Ocean. And what you can see pictured here with people preparing for a festival of racing dhow sailing boats just before what you can see is a menacing storm. Apparently, I'm in the picture. It's a kind of Where's Waldo? If anybody sees me, please let me know. But the broader framework of this talk is climate change. And the specific challenge that this raises for social scientists to try to understand the behavior of a species, us, who are progressively destroying our home. And this is a very, very personal picture because this is actually our home outside Winters, about to burn down in 2020, taken by our very brave house sitter, Caroline Newell, who I think is in the audience. We haven't seen her since this. Hey, thank you so much. Unbelievable picture to take as she was fleeing. But it sets the scene for, this sets the scene, and of course what's been happening in LA over the last couple of weeks sets the scene for highlighting how important it is to change our institutions, both national and international, with respect to mitigating climate change. The the institutional sort of nudge that I'm going to talk about today is something called payments for environmental services. And these are payments that come from either private or public sources. They are designed to incentivize environmental behavior, and the payments are, of course, contingent on compliance. And a sort of classic example is the people at the bottom of this watershed here are basically going to paying the people at the top not to cut down trees so that the rivers stay clean and to avoid siltation. So there's sort of a payment up the river and then a service provided down the river. I'm going to talk about a specific payment for environmental services program called REDD+, which stands for Reduced Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. It's a global initiative to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's Basically, it offers financial incentives for slowing deforestation, so that's why it falls under PES. And it's a program mainly under the UN Forum for Convention for Climate Change that is targeted primarily at developing countries. Now, with all these kinds of instruments, they're always the sort of devil is in the details, and I'm not going to get into this in any great detail, but I just want to point out that these communities or people, individuals, there are many different sort of entities this can be targeted at, need to show demonstrable reductions of greenhouse gas emissions, which is probably many of you here work in this area and know that this is extremely complex and difficult to do. They need to show additionality. That means that they need to show that as a result of being in this program, of receiving payments, they are slowing down their deforestation more than they would have had they not been in the program. So that's kind of accessing some sort of counterfactual, which again is a very complex thing to show. And then the payments need to go to appropriate beneficiaries. You probably all know that sort of with programs like remunerations, reparations, compensation, it can be hard to design systems that are impervious to cheating, to gaming, or to elite capture, basically the rich people benefiting from the program. Oops, wrong one. So many people are very excited about REDD+. They call it a triple win, a win for climate because this slows down deforestation, biodiversity because often this involves protecting wild places, and eradicating poverty because payments are involved. But then there's another school who say better dead than red. And this is a critique comes mainly from social scientists who are concerned about this sort of conservation and Western development as a form of neocolonialism and driven by neoliberal values. And there's merit in both these positions, and I will come back to them later on in the talk. So our adventure started on holiday in 2014. This is Tim and I were on, this is Tim in the front, my husband, who's sort of very much a partner in this research, and who of course many of you know here. We were on holiday on Pemba Island, which is it's the northern island of the Zanzibar archipelago, and it's a semi-autonomous area of Tanzania. We used to work over on the border near Congo, but we were on holiday here. We were in the local Starbucks, and we found out about REDD+. So what we are looking a little bit more deeply, I found out that there were 18 shehia are like wards or groups of villages who were enrolled in a REDD+ project, which was called HEMA. And I'll be using sort of REDD+ and HEMA interchangeably throughout this talk to refer to the shehia, to the wards in which the project was going on. Looking a little bit further, I found out that actually the project was almost finishing. It had been going on between 2010 and 2015, funded by Norwegians and implemented by CARE International and other organizations. The communities were being supported with forestry management institutions, often supporting traditional institutions they had, but helping to extend them. And of course, the communities had been promised carbon credits in proportion to the reduced deforestation, as I outlined in the previous slide. So I got back to Pemba and was very excited to write a proposal which had what I thought was brilliant alliteration. The goal was to see whether carbon accreditation, the payments that come from carbon, might be used to foster the cooperation that would be needed to conserve these forests for basically saving carbon and then getting the payments again. So I was super excited about this. Before we go into a little bit more deeply into what I was planning to do, I want you to think of pro-environmental or sustainable or conservation acts, we think of them interchangeably, as being both cooperative and personally costly. They're cooperative with others in the village. We've all got to agree that we're not going to cut down trees, that we're going to police each other's behavior. They're cooperative with the global community, obviously, because we are all suffering and at risk from climate change, and of course with the cohorts of unborn children who are going to suffer from our behavior if we don't change it in the present. The behaviors are also personally costly. Often conservation entails limiting consumption, and often it involves policing the behavior of others, telling people off, fining them, and we all know that can get us to lose friends. And so just to illustrate it here, these are two guys who have heard chopping in the forest, and they're going to go in and try to find out what's going on. Now, this is costly in terms of time. They could be, normally this is done at night. It's costly in terms of time. They could be fishing. It's costly in terms of danger. If you meet people from outside the village, outside the shehir, they may well be violent against you. And if you meet people from inside your shehir and you have to arrest them or take their logs away from them, you're not going to be very popular within the village. And it's also, I can personally attest to, extremely painful. I don't know if any of you have walked across mangrove at night in bare feet, and you really get nasty cut feet. So they complain that having to do patrols bila butsi, which means without boots, is really costly. So with that sort of recognition that conservation and cooperation with others is costly, we sort of get the nub of the problem. And that is that, on general, this is just going to a straight sort of natural selection model, individuals who behave in a non-cooperative way, so the dark circles at the bottom here, are more likely to proliferate over time than those who are cooperative just because they don't bear the costs of cooperation. This is obviously a model from natural selection, but you could think about this in terms of like the behavior of these guys, a culturally transmitted behavior. Doing a behavior like patrolling is pretty costly. Other people are going to sit around and say, I don't want cut feet like theirs. I'm not going to adopt that behavior. So this question arises is, can a situation arise where cooperative conservationists are favored? And here we have to turn to a model long ago, the price equation, and work that was developed also by D.W. Wilson and expanded enormously by Boyd and Richardson. Pete Richardson, of course, is here, where they recognize that if you have groups of individuals who are cooperative, they may, under some circumstances, proliferate over time. And that is if the selection pressure between groups is greater than the selection pressure within groups. So the outcome depends on the balance of both effects. So the conceit here of my grant proposal was that if RED is paying communities for carbon, conservation traits will spread across Pemba because the benefit is being brought to the group. And just to sort of make this more concrete, what is the mechanism here? The mechanism we're imagining is you get paid, you get your carbon payment, and you put it maybe into building a school or a dispensary, a road or a mosque. And then other communities will look around and say, oh, wow, our neighbors have got this new nice school. You know, what are they doing? Oh, wow, they've been saving their trees, they're getting these payments. Let's join, let's try to go into the program. So this is a sort of a direct test of Richardson and Boyd's model of payoff-biased transmission. And mosques are very important. Pemba is 99.9% Muslim. People pray 5 times a day. Here you see a fisherman who's come onto land for evening prayers. And normally they have to go to kind of their village mosques, which look pretty rough like this. But if there's the opportunity of getting funding and building a nice fancy one like this one under construction, that is going to be a real incentive to possibly go into the carbon program. So just to make absolutely clear that I'm not talking about genetic selection, the idea here is economic incentives are operating as a selection force on cultural traits, okay? That's the fundamental argument here, that we are, as humans, very concerned with economics. So let's go back to Pemba. These are known as, people often talk about people living on islands like Pemba as forest-dependent communities. The island itself is known as Al Jazeera Al Khadra, which means the Green Isle. And people depend on forests for cooking, for building, all sorts of stuff. For the non-timber products are important for food and medicines. I've got a picture of this woman collecting crustacea, collecting shellfish in a mangrove forest, or kids here cooking a bird that they've trapped in the forest. But the forests are under threat from cultivation. You can see cassava plantations and fruit trees in the front here, and also grazing land for livestock. There's also major population growth. 45% of the population are under 15. There's still effectively natural fertility on the island, with women having 7, 8, or 9 children. And then there's huge outside demand for the timber, both from the northern island, the southern island, which is a very touristic venue, lots of building of hotels. Also, the police and the army from the mainland like to raid the timbers from Pemba, and also actually demand from China as well. So these forests are under heavy pressure, both internally and externally. Our work has shown that 31% of total income for households comes from forest products. And you can see here that although wealthier households have a higher forest income, they take more from the forest than do poorer households. If you look at the proportion of income that comes from the forest, poorer households depend on the forest more than do wealthy households, which is a pretty common pattern in these kinds of forest-dependent communities. So we were awarded the money, thank you to the seed grant, and we got back to Pemba in 2015, and were invited to the celebration of what was called Red Readiness for these 18 shahir. And they were basically, what you can see in this picture is the community members receiving copies of their COFMA. COFMA stands for a Community Forest Management Agreement. And this effectively gives the communities legal rights to manage their forests in such a way that they can sell the carbon. So this is incredibly important for all of you, I think, who work in conservation. You know that having secure land tenure rights to your land is very important to help manage resources. And these COFMAs had institutions to manage their forests. So think of like committees to oversee all of the activities. Think of rules to regulate how much we're going to allow different people in the community to, when they can cut down trees, how much firewood they can use, etc. And also regulations for policing, and what to do when you police, and how to punish and how to fine, and all of these kinds of institutions were put in place. The program also introduced motivation payments, which were kind of mock payments, pretending they came from the carbon market, but they were actually just mock payments to help them put into place procedures to decide how to use the money. Should it go to a hospital? Should it go to a school? Should it go to a mosque? Whatever. And then they were also supported with some small alternative livelihood projects, often known as co-benefits in the red literature, things like beekeeping and seedling nurseries and things like that. So I was super excited. Here I was going to get this cultural, oh yes, I didn't say it in the earlier slide there, I probably should. I missed it. Right, so I said if RED is paying communities for carbon, conservation traits will spread across Pemba. And this was something that Tim Waring, who was a grad student here, called a cultural multi-level selection cascade. And this is this idea that this trait that brings benefits will be copied by other people, other villages, and therefore we'll sort of be able to watch the spread of conservation across the island effectively in real time. Let me go back to that. Yes, so I was all excited to see the CLMLS cascade and effectively to watch the evolution of cooperation in real time across the island. We wrote it together with a load of Pembans, politicians, people in the forest department, and some leaders of NGOs. We wrote an article which basically answered in the affirmative the question of whether RED would have a chance in Pemba. The institutions were a good fit to Pemba for multiple reasons. And we also showed in that paper with data actually from the Hyman Lab here in Davis that in that period, comparing before 2010, the beginning of the HEMA project, and after, about half of these shahir had slowed down their rate of deforestation. They were still deforesting, but they'd slowed down. So, but by the time the paper came out in 2020, I had to accompany the paper with a blog called I've Got the Red Blues. And this was because there had been no payments even 5 years after the project had ended. And spoiler alert, there has not been a payment until today. And this is not because the communities are not participating. They're not all doing fantastically, but as I've just shown you, almost half of them had slowed down, and that was before they were even receiving any payments. This is to do with administrative and technical inefficiency among the Western partners. And we might want to talk about this more at dinner, but I won't talk about it now. This put me in a very grey mood, and I was really ready to walk away from Pemba. I was really excited about the project, and the motivation payments were not there, so what was there for me to study? But thank God for postdocs. Jeff Andrews kept cheerful, and he said, hey, Monique, let's ask, has exposure to a failed, somewhat failed obviously, RED Plus program affected residents' willingness to participate in future RED schemes? And I told him, silly, of course it has. Of course they're not going to be happy to participate. This is where I dip into the sort of better dead than red critique. A lot of people have argued that once you start to pay people for things they used to do out of moral motivation, you effectively crowd out intrinsic motivation, this sort of idea, no pay, no care. The second critique of these kinds of PES payments, these payment for environmental services programs, is that by putting economic value on natural resources, it's a kind of honeypot. It attracts in green grabs, or in the case of Pemba, it will attract in the national government, who had actually offered these COFMA agreements. But once they see there's a real money in red, in trading carbon, they're going to grab them back. And then people feel, well, why do we look after our forests? It's not ours any longer, it belongs to the government. And then also, communities, to be honest, get pretty sick of conservationists coming from the north, the west, with all their fancy ideas, one acronym after another. Hey, we're going to solve things for you. Everything's going to be great. In this case, we're even going to pay you for what Pemba see as hot air. And then there were no payments. So you can understand why I thought the answer to this question would be yes, exposure has made them unwilling to participate in future RED programs. So we asked them this question: how much would you be willing to accept to commit your household to no cutting of hardwoods for a year? We did this across the 18 RED Plus shahir, 6 control shahir, so that's about over 800 households. And this is not how we analyze the data, but it helps me to sort of show it like this. What you can see here are the WTAs. So this is sort of how much they're demanding to be compensated for if they're not allowed to cut trees. And this is plotted on household income. And you can see there's some that we've colored red. That basically means they're asking for more, thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, more than they've ever had in their lives. We view those as protest bids. But there are some people who ask for less. And if you look at those plotted on total forest income, so not total household income, but total forest income, people who ask for less than they get from the forest, we consider willing, and people who ask for more, but less than total income, we consider as reluctant. So that's kind of what the data look like. Because I work with an economist, everything has to be done with supply and demand curves, and they're horrible to read. But I've taken a pretty simple graph out of the paper, which I hope is quite easy to explain. And that is, look, the red ones, the ones that were under the RED program, have got way less protest bids than the ones who weren't in the program. So they are not pissed off. And here you can see the actual WTAs, and again, the red line is consistently lower than the blue one, the ones who were not in red. So there's kind of something interesting going on here. The question is why? Is it the co-benefits? Is it those beekeeping projects? and nurseries and things like that. It's unlikely. There were relatively few. They were targeted mainly at women, and they were quite successful, but they were small, unlikely to account for this. Things get even more interesting and surprising and unexpected in that when we went back in 2019, we found there'd been a real expansion of these COFMAs on Pemba, despite the fact there'd been no payments. Now the figure is, the graph is, the map is a bit messy, but it's made clearer here. Unfortunately, colored in green are the original 18 Red Plus HEMA Shahir. But the interesting thing here is that there are a whole lot, there are like 13 Shahir who are basically working with or trying to get into the COFMA program with different kinds of partners. And then there's another 3 or 4 Shahir who are writing letters to sort of want to be brought into, want to get a COFMA. These ones are already in some sort of negotiation. Then move forward to last summer. It's very weird. The 18 has actually grown to 24, and that's because actually the carbon agent has gone back to Zanzibar and is trying a sort of what they call now HEMA 2. And so some of the communities that were in here have now gone into there. So we've got basically 23 COFMAs being contracted under HEMA. And then we've got 2 lots here who have been contracted under other organizations or who are working towards COFMA status. And then we've got another 10 who are requesting COFMA status. So what is going on? It can't be that payoff bias transmission that I talked about, because there's no mosques to be jealous of, there's no roads, there's no hospitals, there's no schools. What is happening? And I think it's to do with theft. And it's to do with trees moving. You know, Burnham would be come to Dunsinane or whatever. Trees move in Pemba. Let me explain why. It's something called leakage, which is a technical term from the Red Plus literature. And technically it's defined as a way of externalizing costs outside of the intended governance boundary. So what you're seeing here is a shahir with quite a lot of forest in the front that they want to protect. Actually, the photo is taken from a 1904 lighthouse built by the British, not a drone. So I'm up on the lighthouse, I'm taking this picture. People are, what they do is they want to protect this because they're still hoping one day they might get carbon payments. And then at night, they sneak across to the other side of the bay, cut down trees, bring them back and build their houses. So that's the definition of leakage, and that's why trees are moving between these shahir. So this gave us an idea. Oh, yeah, well, so this is something, this is from an earlier paper, but we also thought this might be important, that Shahir Wamba there is surrounded by 4 villages in a COFMA, in a red COFMA, who are stealing trees from Wamba all the time. So Wamba was one of those ones in the orange bar who are desperate to get into the program because they want to get the institutions to keep these neighbors out. Neighbors are a pain. So we come back. So the question then is, can leakage lead to the spread of conservation? Can leakage be responsible for this CMLS cascade? It's a sort of weird question because anybody who works on red sees leakage as a bad thing. And we're turning this on its head. So we're coming back to this same model here, but driven not by payoff bias transmission, but by leakage. And we turn here to agent-based modeling, and we're modeling the effects of leakage on the emergence and spread of cooperation. So on basically the development of the emergence of community-based natural resource management institutions. And what we have here is we have 2 scenarios, a 2-group scenario and a multi-group scenario. And then we have the red shahir, and they're basically going out and stealing the trees, and the trees are going back in. And the same here with the multi-group one. And what the chief modeler here, that's Jeff Andrews, is doing is he can vary the extent of leakage that comes out of these reds. So how we can vary that experimentally. And we're really interested in the behavior of the neighbors. That's the target of what we're looking at here. It's a very complicated model, like all models are these days, and I'm going to just go through it pretty superficially. But the main thing we're interested in are these institutions, where the agents will invest in excluding, so keeping other people out. Are they willing to go out and do patrols and things like that? And how keen are they to regulate their own behavior, to make rules about what we can and what we can't do? And so they have these rules. They then go into the harvesting thing when agents choose whether to harvest at home or to go and steal from elsewhere. They decide how much to harvest. They decide whether they're going to act as a patrol, to make inspections, and to seize. If you're a patroller and you find somebody, you can seize some of his logs. So you do get some benefit, which overcomes part of the free riding problem. They then, at the end of their harvesting period, they earn some wages. They get some payoffs calculated to how much, the costs and benefits. And then we go into this level of sort of social learning when the agents can learn from each other. So they can see what did he do, what did she do in the previous round, in this round, and what have they earned, and shall I copy them or not? And this is based on the assumption that people are copying the more economically effective strategy. We then have some ecological dynamics, trees regrow, trees get harvested. And we come back here to this phase where the individuals come back into their shahir and they basically aggregate the beliefs that they've developed here to form what we call the group's maximum allowable harvest. A maximum allowable harvest is what our internal regulations, how much we are allowed to harvest. If people harvest above it, that we can then punish them. If you decide to be a punisher, you can punish them. So this is the internal regulation, which is, of course, a key to a sort of community conservation program like this. So, then we come back, right, so just to sort of highlight here, the institutions we're particularly interested in are access rights, so that's enforcing boundaries, keeping people from other villages outside, so keeping these people out, keeping the red people out of here, and use rights, which is in-group regulation, maximum allowable harvest, MAR. Those are the two institutions. And I'm not going to take you through all the model, but I'm just going to give you the two main results. In the two-group scenario, leakage increases support for exclusion, but it erodes in-group regulatory institutions. So exclusion is not difficult to explain. If people are coming out, coming and stealing your stuff, it's not surprising you put effort in to try to keep them out. But it's very hard in the model to find that sweet spot where there's enough leakage coming out, or enough people coming to steal your trees that actually motivates people to do patrolling. But if it's too high, then it's not worth investing in regulating your own behavior, because why regulate your own behavior when other people are stealing it? This is the kind of the key dynamic there. Whereas in the multi-group scenario, leakage, in many more runs of the model, leakage can promote both the emergence of both institutions. So, I mean, you can see what happens here. These people go out and steal from there, they steal from them, and they're all stealing. It gets absolutely crazy. All the agents start to invest heavily in policing their boundaries. They get some benefits if they manage to find somebody. They get some confiscated logs. And when these boundaries are firm enough, when you can really be sure people aren't coming in, then people decide to lower their maximum allowable harvest. So you can get these kinds of sweet spots where the institutions arise. Now, next slide is horrible. Nobody wants to look at anything like this. People who are modelers might be interested. There's sort of some really key Locke-Volterra dynamics in here that are kind of critical to the model. If people want to ask about it afterwards, I can answer some, not all questions. But I just wanted to make this point that what we're really doing here is modeling the evolution of Ostrom's first two design principles. So why do people protect their boundaries, and how do internal regulations arise? Okay, so to get on to some empirics, there's sort of predictions from the model. First of all, if you get more theft from outsiders, do we actually see more effort invested in exclusion? And the data we have on this is sort of mainly my stuff. I spend most of my time in Pemba, sitting around with people in villages and with committees like this, collecting data, but mainly chatting, just hearing their challenges, what they're doing, how they're trying to solve problems, what new problems are arising. And I work with this wonderful man, Asaj Ngwali, who is just really, really inspirational to them and helps them with solving many of their problems. So really, while he's working with them, I'm collecting data. It's a great way to work. There's obviously lots of data that we have from this work, but the only one I'm going to show is that, yes, more theft from outsiders. Do we get more effort invested in exclusion? The answer is kind of yes, because if we look at, I think we got 42 Shahir right, and there are rather few where resource theft is not emphasized, but where it is emphasized, you get much more effort putting in boundary markings. So that's like putting in sort of, I can only think of the Swahili word, but anyhow, making clear boundaries to your village. Conducting arrests, organizing those patrols that I showed you a picture of, and even reporting to outsiders. And so, I mean, this is hardly a surprising result, but it is consistent with the model. More interesting, actually, is the work of our graduate students. So the question here was, does successful exclusion of leakage lead to better internal regulation? So that is a lower MAR, a lower maximum allowable harvest. And so Matt Clark led this work. He did really interesting stuff working in all of, well, the 49 Shahir that have mangrove forest, so in the littoral areas. And he basically used community participatory mapping. So this meant we brought to them maps where their mangrove forest was divided into grids. And then onto each grid square, they could put a marker to say whether it was heavily impacted by theft from outsiders or not. And they could also put a marker to show whether they thought the condition of the mangrove was improving or getting worse. And then he also asked them, they filled out a little questionnaire about sort of allowable harvest strategies, and to basically get an idea of what they thought an appropriate MAR for their Shahir, for their community would be. So how much they were committed to internal regulation. And what Matt found is that when theft is effectively controlled, so there's not much dangers with outsiders coming in, you can see that they kept their bundle. The particular question here is how many bundles of firewood can women collect over a certain amount of time. They would keep, so that's our indicator of MAR, and they could keep it pretty low, even when the state of the mangrove forest was declining. It almost declined a little bit, so they're really keeping their MAR low. However, in the Shahir, where many of their grid squares had high levels of theft, that the theft was uncontrolled, you can see that the MAR just starts to go up rapidly. And basically what you've got here is a race to the bottom. What they say is, we can't keep people out. We might as well just cut down all these trees so we get the benefit rather than anybody else. So I'm going to end. I don't know if I'm on my 5 minutes, or Christina hasn't put her hand up, or she's gone to sleep. She's fine. I'm okay. Oh, 7 minutes. Perfect. I'm going to end with just one really short little reflection on REDD+ in Pemba, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'll start with the ugly. And this is Amy Collins's work. She was a grad student here working in the Hyman Lab. And this is work that she did with Mark Grody, who's here. And Mark put an incredible amount of work into this paper. And what we can see here is the sort of bad news here, very simply, is this is the observed forest cover change between 2010 and 2018. And you can see that most of the Shahir are under zero. So most have lost forests over those years, which is kind of not surprising given they haven't had payments, right? But that's kind of bad news. And more bad news, but kind of what you expect, is that the red line, so this dotted line is the predicted line amount of deforestation based on a kind of training set we have from other Shahir on the island, and capturing things like population density, how far they were to local towns, and elevation and things like that might be associated with rates of deforestation. And what you can see is the red ones, the red plus ones, which are kind of colored brown here, would be nice if they all laid above this line, but they don't. But of course, this is really not surprising because we've still had no red payments, as I told you. So that's the bad. The ugly is that despite the issuing of COFMAs, those legal documents that communities were given to give them rights to trade their own carbon, the government it does not seem to support community-based conservation very much, and actually has rather different ideas about what to do with the forests and beaches of Pemba. And we're starting to see all of these kinds of private sell-offs of forest to tourist developments. This one is taking a huge area of forest away, and this is taking a beautiful island where Tim does a lot of his crab work. And the dynamics here are complicated to understand quite what's going on, and I'd love people to give me ideas how I can expand my science to deal with this. So that's the ugly. There is some good. When you saw this graph earlier, I didn't point out, but there's about 3% of the population ask for nothing. You can tell me I can't cut down any trees. I don't want any money. I don't want to cut down trees either. And so there are highly motivated, incredible people like these two men who go to what they call their motivation tree every day to give themselves kind of strength to keep on fighting for their forests. This was a tree that was cut down by an outsider. There's some really motivated Pembans who we try to work with to help to take things forward. And this was just last summer. I nearly fell into this hole. This is a very innovative committee who know that the army, who are next door to their shahir, are coming in and stealing logs at night. And so they're digging these holes, and then the army's ox carts fall into these at night, and they can't get them out. And so the police and the army have to run away. And then the guy, I mean, of course, the tree's gone, so it's not great, but at least it's putting them off. I nearly fell in, so that wasn't so funny, but I'm clumsy. So I'm going to finish, this is the last slide, that I've tried to tell what's obviously an unfinished story about the relationship between theory, which basically we use theory to direct us to the kinds of evidence that we need to collect to see whether our theory, the way we're thinking about a problem, is right. But then reality, mean reality, steps in and causes us to sort of reassess and change our theory. So what happened really for me in Pemba, but I sort of summarizes this talk as well, is while we were on holiday, we discovered red. Yeah, the main lesson, of course, is holidays are great for science, right? So while we were on holidays, we discovered red. This led me, well, because of teaching with Pete Richardson here, who has been one of the driving forces in looking at group level selection, that sort of gave me the motivation to think about how we might study the spread of red under cultural multi-level selection, specifically with the payoff bias transmission under PES incentives. So I was all ready to go. Then we got the horrible slap in the face. This actually became clear to me on my 64th birthday. I was up in the Redwoods, and I think I got an email which made me realize that there were never going to be any payments. Yeah, it was a very sad day. I actually remember crying on my birthday. But despite the sort of misery, we actually found low WTAs. People didn't seem to be grumpy about the whole thing. They were still willing to go in with another hypothetical operator. And we found that institutional expansion of all those communities wanting to go into the RED Plus program. So this made us rethink our cultural multi-level selection, driven not now by payoff bias transmission, but by leakage. And that led us into the more sort of empirical work to see whether leakage can indeed drive exclusion and internal regulation. But back to the ugly again, because there's no political buy-in at higher levels, I'm kind of stumped now as to how to go forward, and I would love to hear people's ideas. And just with that, I would like to thank just an incredible team, this Department of Forestry, unbelievably under-resourced, just amazing people to work with, and incredible colleagues, both here and in Pemba. Thanks to all of them and to our funders. Thanks very much.
People, and I can give them the microphone. Okay.
I can call on Mark, because inevitably he puts his hand up.
Thanks, that was great. So I wanted to ask a question about the model you had, and you had the two community system, and then you had the multi-community system, and you called them two and multi.
Yeah.
But then as you were explaining the outcomes of the model, you were seemingly talking about a rate of theft, as if maybe it wasn't the fact that there were two communities, but that the green blob was as big as the red blob. And I was wondering if you could clarify on whether it's actually a problem with the number of communities that you have, or the poaching pressure based on sort of the relative size of those communities. Thanks.
That's a really good question, Mark. And if I was brave, I would put the figure up. I actually, having been up since I woke up at 3:30, I'm not happy to walk through all those graphs in public. But you've put your finger on something really important. It's actually both, because the amount of theft, of course, it depends a little bit on the layout, and we just had that grid layout. But as you have more communities, you're getting stolen from more sides. So you're actually getting more pressure into leakage. So that puts a greater premium on investing in exclusion. And then once you've got really effective exclusion, space opens up in the model for the emergence of self-regulation, as you can understand, because you can be more certain. But there is another dynamic going on that I actually just emailed Jeff about this morning. Actually, there's two, there's various. One, of course, is that you've got, because there's social learning in there, people can learn from anybody. They can learn from their own community, or they can learn from other ones. If you've got more independent communities, there's more diversity to learn from. And we know from other areas of modeling that, with more diverse communities, you get greater innovation and stuff like that. There's more room for varying traits to emerge. And so if people are smart and they're imitating from the person who's doing best, you've just got a bigger pool to. So it's not quite, you're completely right, it's not exactly the story I told. There is more to it, and it's really the variation. But the multi-group level model is still more efficient at explaining the evolution of self-regulation than is the single group one. That was just a question I was anticipating and dreading, so thank you very much for getting it in. Susan.
Hi, wonderful talk. So exciting to finally hear about the whole story after all these years of hearing parts of it. It's really fun, thank you. I was curious if the whole idea of cooperation for conservation being driven by conflict between groups and poaching between groups is really intriguing. And I wonder if, just in your observation, that dynamic generated other kinds of intra-group conflict. Did community relations between groups deteriorate as a result of this new system?
Well, not that much, because it's a bit naughty to talk about. Pemba's so small, all of these shahir, you can cross one the island is like 7 kilometers wide and 40 kilometers long or something. It's really small. And so everybody's got relatives in other shahir, family, friends, people they trade with. So no, it doesn't lead to social breakdown, but these boundary problems between, I explained it just as trees moving, because that was easier. Really, what's going on is discussion over boundaries. Like there might be a really nice bit of forest that both shahir are claiming. And what we're actually trying to do in those cases is get the shahir to work together as kind of like a co-management between two communities. And that has worked not when I say we, Asar Ngwali, the guy I work with, he sort of it was amazing. He really kind of landed on that himself. And then later, I told him about Ostrom's models and how this kind of higher level hierarchical organization can help to solve some problems. And he was just so chuffed. He said, but Monique, we're already doing that, you know. So yeah, there are tensions between communities, but there are ways to coordinate them. Yes.
Impacts this like spread of conservation. You said it was like 99.9%, and just having experienced that culture, like how do you think it is impacting this?
How Islam?
Yeah.
So again, Assar tells me every Friday, you know, there's the big mosque where there's a like kind of sermon, and probably 1 in 3 weeks it covers environmental issues. There's a lot of verses and sutra in the Quran that address environmental issues. I don't read Arabic, so and I haven't read the Quran, so I don't know exactly what they are. But there was a paper just in Prop B, I think, maybe last year or maybe even this year, I'm not sure, or 2023, 2024, which actually looked at the Islamic scripts that were believed to be supportive of sustainable behavior. And I have to say I was a little bit underwhelmed. Tremendous love and respect for gardens, for cultivated plants, for beauty, for, we think of like these sort of wonderful Arab gardens, that is really, really central to a lot of, the verses that I read. There wasn't much on conserving things that weren't of direct value to humans in sort of terms of gardening or eating or stuff like that. But there may well be other people in this room who know the Quran, who could give me a better answer. Is there anyone who'd like to? Because I'm clearly not the expert on this. But we have thought actually quite seriously of trying to work more closely with the mosques. We do already work with the imams in the villages, and they are very influential, and they like what we're doing. This is, when I say we, it's applied work we're doing, as I haven't talked about today. So the imams are supportive, but I don't quite know how closely it links to the Quran itself.
We're going to take a moment to take a question that's on Zoom. This is 2 parts. Your research question focuses mainly on the economic aspects of these groups, but how do their ritual practices as a village contribute to their behavior in the conservation project? And do you see ritual and tradition reinforcing or perhaps even conflicting with economic motivations?
Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you very much. And I didn't emphasize that enough, that the institutions that Red Readiness is strengthening are almost always built, in fact, they are always built on village traditions for protecting forests. So in a sense, these are not new ideas, that we're offering new techniques, but the commitment to try to maintain the forest is held strongly by the villagers, that they need it for everything. And they've read about and they've heard other parts of Tanzania which have turned into what they call desert, and they know they wouldn't be able to live there or make any sort of living. So yes, these traditional ideas are extremely important. And actually that motivation tree, that's a really interesting village that long before Red started, they've been trying to keep colonialists out, they tried to keep the British out, they tried to keep Finnish aid agencies out. They've been really aggressive in trying to say, we can manage this forest with our own institutions and we don't need any of your fancy ideas. So yes, the answer to that is yes, and thanks, I should have made that clearer. With respect to traditions and rituals, this kind of goes back to because most of the religious activities are tied to the mosque, although there are also witch doctors, but they're kind of even sort of actually integrated in a lot of the Islamic practice as well. They're not anything that I can see that's specifically related to protecting the environment, but I may be wrong on that. That's not an area that I've looked into in great detail. I don't know, Kate. Hi.
Oh. Hey, Monique. Just fascinating talk. I'm curious, given the meetings that you've been holding with the civic leaders within the Shia, what is the role of women? It looked like it was all men who were sitting around, and women often play, especially in Muslim societies, sort of a behind-the-scenes influencing role or militating role, depending on what's going on. So what were you able to perceive?
Yes, I had in my head to apologize that it was a meeting where the men are more in those committees than the women, but there is a big thing in the Zanzibari revolutionary government now that there has to be gender equity. So there are women put onto those committees. They very often don't turn up. But I've done lots of work just with the women, and they're the one who are obviously collecting the firewood, and firewood is a very heavy demand on the forest. And actually, when we look with those highly motivated individuals, the individuals who wanted zero payment, a lot more women than men there. So they are very much committed to the importance of the forest. It's mainly the men who are cutting trees for building boats and houses and stuff like that. The women don't necessarily get that cash. So there's quite a gender difference there in terms of the women being interested. I mean, I hate to make these generalizations because there's some amazing guys and there's some women who think what we're trying to do is absolute rubbish, but women are very much part of it. But you have to design your research in Pemba, I mean, unless you're working in formal committees where women are there, but otherwise you have to organize your meetings with women or with men just to learn more. And anyway, when the men go off and pray, I get left with the women, right? And we just sit around and chat. It's great. And they pray 5 times a day, right? So lots of time to chat.
Hi, Monique, this is fascinating at so many levels from the cultural side. So a couple of questions linked together. One is, if you could tell us a little bit more about the kinship system, because no doubt, as you said, it's such a small space, there are lots of marriages and movement of people back and forth, and connected to that would be inheritance, who owns what, and does that have to affect who is willing to cooperate, so kinship and cooperation and inheritance. And one last piece of that, so often we know in East Africa, and I know from the Arab side of things, that there's a huge distrust of government and external agencies, and how does that affect the willingness to collaborate or cooperate, and whether they even expect payment ever?
Yes. So the last one first. The payment, of course, doesn't come from the government. It comes from these white conservationists, right? And yeah, there's distrust. And actually, we asked Brian's son last night what he thought about the RED program. And this is an 11-year-old, very perspicaciously said, I asked him, would you, if somebody paid you money not to cut down trees, would you conform? He said, I wouldn't trust it. Well, so he got the PEM, thank God he's not here because he already knows it. He got the PEMPANs perfectly. Of course they were mistrustful, but I think Pembans, well, there's a whole lot behind this, but I think Pembans are Zanzibaris, generally coastal communities, are so aware of what is happening. Westerners coming in, telling people about climate change. We don't need to do it, they know. They're seeing, cloves, not with a VES, is the main crop on this island, incredibly responsive to climate change. They are absolutely aware of what's going on. They know they need to try to protect forests. They know they need it anyhow for their own household economy. And so even if Westerners are going to come in with all their fancy fads and make these false promises and stuff, they are still willing to work with outside powers because they need help. And that's why I'm sticking with it, because there's all kinds of critiques you can make of programs like this, but it's the best we have. It's a bit like the democracy thing, right? It doesn't work well, but it's the best we have. So that's the trust issue. The family stuff, yeah, I mean, these huge families. Cross-cousin marriage is favored, and parallel. So you can marry your mother's brother's daughter. A man can marry your mother's brother's daughter, but he can't marry his father's brother's daughter. So this leads to it's a nightmare conducting. In another project, I do genealogical trees, and there aren't enough dimensions in my head or anything to be able to cope with how everyone's related to everyone. And inherit, so yeah, and property, these clove trees, which are really valuable, and the boats are very valuable, are transmitted, 66% to sons, 30% to daughters. But I've tried to study that, but Pemba had a revolution. It had a very complicated history with slavery and Indians owning most of the clove trees. And I've now tried to study the history of, I had actually a collaborator trying to study the history of clove trees to try to understand the inheritance system. But because the government grabbed all clove trees after the revolution in '64, the records have basically been destroyed. And so it's a mess. I can't give a good cultural anthropological answer other than to say that the government messed things up. Scott?
Yeah, you anticipated a relationship between the firmness of a Shia's boundaries, how well they were able to organize and protect their forests, and the possible development of self-regulation in their behavior. And as part of that, I'm also wondering if you anticipated or observed anything about patterns of continued piracy from the residents of those better protected Shias.
That's the Locke-Volterra dynamics. I'm tired. As you get more and more people coming in stealing stuff, you get more and more people patrolling to try and get some of the confiscated logs. You start to lose forest, and then less people come in, and then less people patrol. So there's a kind of dynamic there, and that's why this multi-group thing is kind of critical, because there got to be enough groups at different stages in that dynamic for a good behavioral outcome to be imitatable. But you're right, it's a very dynamic system. And so the success in being a patroller depends on how many people are coming in. But if too many people come in, then there's not enough to steal any longer. So other people won't come in, and then the patrollers won't get any benefits. And then you could easily drop off the system and not bother to, like Matt's work showed, not bother to protect at all. So it's delicate. And I should probably say, I mean, if you read the paper, the space in which cooperation evolves under those conditions is not enormous, but it can evolve. It's not tiny. And as we try to parameterize this model better, we're trying to get better measures of leakage now, we may be able to do something more convincing. It's not entirely convincing yet, I have to say, but it opens a window for me of how we could move forward with getting greater lower Mars, greater internal regulation.
So is that aspiration based upon the fact that you do have this kind of fine-grained resolution and more variables you're measuring for a deeper analysis of this cultural metapopulation?
Yeah, right. I mean, the attraction of working in Pemba was that it's a small island and there are all these different communities, and I've become much more interested in comparative work over time. And so it gives you that possibility of collecting all this data on different communities, rather than the old anthropologist go and sit in her village, and sit on, just learn about one village. But the data demands it's a lot of work. And most of the people I work with now want to do modeling. They don't want to go around and collect data from these endless villages. It's hard work. Tim helps. He's an incredible. Tim helps me driving in the daytime, because we do have to go to all these different places. And then I help him collect crabs at night. And I tell you, my job's nicer than his.
First of all, thank you. I thought your presentation was really interesting. So my question is a little bit similar to someone else's, but I kind of wanted to talk about it a bit more. It's about intrinsic motivation to conserve, specifically with the graph where there was 3% of people that didn't need any sort of reimbursement or whatever for conserving. Has anybody ever studied why they're more motivated versus other people, and also for the 18 districts that were part of the Red Plus program, like what makes them more motivated to conserve and be a part of this than the districts that did not participate?
Yes. So the second thing, why were the ones who'd had the experience of red still more positive? I think they just still think that carbon payments may come one day. And as I said, the HEMA project, there is now HEMA 2, and it's taking, I don't know if anybody here really knows much about how red is evolving as an institution, and people are talking more now about making prepayments to communities before they even slow down deforestation, which kind of breaks the additionality and the demonstrability that we had at the beginning. And as far as I understand, what's just happened is that those other 6 that came in have been given prepayments. So that was, sorry, your second question was I've answered that. Okay, right. Your first one, yeah, those guys. Who are they? Why are they like that? I'm in a village where I do much more detailed work. I designed a study, and I'm actually looking at the data, and I can't get as much variation as Jeff got in his WTA. So I'm not finding people like that, which is kind of annoying. But I only had like 40 people in it, so maybe if it's only 3%, that you're not going to get that anyhow. I haven't looked yet, and I want to look at Jeff's data, the big sample, the 872 or whatever, to find out. I do know it's more women than men, but I haven't looked at the economics of their households. Are they rich people? Are they poor people? They're fascinating. We call them deontological conservationists. And I've given a talk like this in the Cultural Evolution Society meeting in Durham earlier at the end of last year. And somebody came up to me and said, I bet they're all people with autism. And apparently the people, I mean, she directed me to all this autistic literature on autism, and she actually wants to come and do a project in Pemba to find out whether there are people who are more autistic and very often more cooperative or more willing to sort of break standard rules. And but I'm sure there's other people here who know more about that kind of stuff. I don't, so I'm struggling. I haven't got a good answer, right? Could be autistic people. I know it's women. And there's lots more data to analyze. And when I looked at my small sample, I didn't find any of them. And that's my small sample where I know the people really well. So I was kind of pissed off because I thought that would open a window for me. And I have no clear window yet. Sorry.
So here's the ecologist wanting to ask a question. So at the start of the study, the Shahiyas that were chosen were presumably not random samples, but already were more forested.
Yes,
and,
thank you.
And maybe just ask if part of the maybe willingness to persist is if by keeping more intact forests, there are other ecological benefits. I don't know, more bees, more other things that they can use in those patches that might incentivize keeping them going even without payment.
Yeah, so I hadn't thought of the second point. That's definitely interesting. Although even the smaller ones, people are very clear about what they like about it. They've got shade, they've got bees, it protects the river. So even though they're small, they're kind of very aware of the ecological benefits. Yeah, the selection of Shahia, I definitely should have said that because obviously it's critical to understanding the impacts of subsequent deforestation. They were selected on 2 grounds that they had larger areas of forest, but they were more under threat. So a little bit of both going on there, but definitely they're bigger areas. And obviously Shahia with no forest were obviously not selected. Mark knows this so well, he's grinning.
And I've seen like 2 more hands. So where's Jennifer? 2 hands or no? Very quick.
No. Oh, Patricia. Oh, my goodness. Oh.
So I don't know if this is quick or not, but you said at the beginning that the fertility was very high, which suggests that the people have to be making plans either for their children to leave Pemba or to somehow have economic growth so that they can live.
There's more Pembans in London than there are on Pemba, I think. Pembans are known all over the world as unbelievably smart, quick, business sharp, tricky people. There's whole sort of quarters of Dar es Salaam that sort of Pemban shopkeepers that people avoid. They have gone everywhere. And they've had a tricky history because when the revolution happened, it was a revolution against the Arab domination of Zanzibar, and a lot of the Arabs went to Pemba and then stayed there, and so it's quite a well-educated, area, and so a lot of people got good education. They went out. Amy, the ecologist who worked with in the Hyman's lab here. We had a classic Pemban experience. We were walking down Main Street of a small town, and this guy comes up, obviously Pemban, and speaks in perfect English and said, "Hi, young ladies, I'm a gynecologist from Leicester." Well, these are obviously not the people working within the villages, right? But so Pembans who get any sort of education or have got family all over the place on the mainland in Africa, what we call Africa, and of course all over the world. So yes, there's huge emigration, but still the population on the island is growing. That population pyramid is terrifying.
Well, let's thank Monique for her talk.
Thank you.